This is a reading of Chapter 2, but it will henceforth be known as Chapter 3, so that YouTube upload numbers coincide with the chapter numbers to make things clearer. Chapter 3. An hour later, Cade was still trying to convince Emin that they had to go. Granda, it isn't safe. Emin was slowly working through a reed basket that he had started a week prior. His gnarled hands couldn't manage much more than a few minutes' work at once, though the small fire quietly crackling away in the brazier in the room's centre helped somewhat. This was Emin's way, though. If it was going to take a long time to do something that needed doing, so be it. Better to start it all the sooner.
Cade, it will be fine. The Scout Corps probably didn't check the pockets of their other trousers. When they do, I'm sure the lost Veer will turn up.
But what if they don't? If he's heading this way?
If he's coming this way, then I'd much rather be here than on the road heading for a place like Nearset. A town that big is only well defended because there's so many people. It attracts Veer in the first damn place.
Cade let out a little humph and tried changing tact. So there's no danger?
No, lad. None at all.
So we should just go about our lives like normal?
That's right, lad. This'll all be forgotten in a week.
So we should probably go to town and replace the fowl we lost last night?
Yeah, I think we should.
Emin stopped mid-sentence and blinked several times in quick succession.
Gah, you massive pain in my bony ass.
Cade beamed a wide smile and scrambled over to where Emin was working.
By the formers, boy, you're relentless.
He said it with a long-suffering tone, but he wore a smile too. Cade wasted no time and pressed his advantage while his grandar was in good spirits. If I have to go anyway, I might as well go to Nearset as Nearton, and I'd get to see a fortress city. I've never seen one, and you always told me how impressive they are. Oh, and if there's no danger, then you can come with us. And I could talk to the armed Vartmore. He said he'd come back for us. Cade waited, hoping Emin would give in. The look of pleading on his face must have been enough. With a sigh, Emin put his basket down with a definitive thump.
Go bridle the horse and ready the cart.
Cade was out of the room before the sentence was done. From a small side room that was used as a dry food store, Cade selected several bits and pieces that would keep, and would get them through until they could find a shelter that would take them in. After this, a linen chest followed, from which he selected some heavy blankets and 2 thick travelling cloaks. Then from his room he collected a pack, his knife, a thicker pair of boots more suited to travelling, and what little coin of his own that he had. Dumping the supplies in the main room and pointedly not looking at Emin, lest he change his mind, he ran up a shallow ramp that led from the front door down into the main living space. Most homes built outside of a city centre were built after a similar fashion. They were most often sunk all the way into the earth, with a trap door opening into a ramp or steps. Emin had built his home to be sunk only 3/4 of the way. This left a thin gap of wall that existed above ground, allowing for a series of heavy wooden shutters to be attached, allowing light to shine in. This was slightly less secure, and to mitigate this, Emin had built the walls of thick stone and had the shutters made to open outwards, so that, once shut, they relied on the strength of the wood and not of the locking pin. Reaching the top of the ramp, Cade turned right and made for a small building erected just beside his home. The building, though made well, was substantially less solid. Its function normally was to house Emin's mare, Sasha, though in the unlikely event of a Veer attack, the relative fragility of the structure allowed it to serve as a sacrificial offering, a somewhat coldly pragmatic move, but it was much more preferable to have your horse eaten and your barn destroyed than to be killed yourself. So the tradition stood, even if the region was blessedly free of Veer. At least it had been. As he opened the barn door, Sasha greeted him with a vibrant whinny. I've missed you too. One day is just too long, isn't it? Sasha blew out a breath and stamped an indignant hoof. Cade selected a feed bag from a hook, bridled Sasha, and clipped the bag on. Sasha munched happily away while Cade set about clipping on her harness and attaching it to the small cart. It was practically a glorified seat, barely big enough to seat Emin and a few small goods that they would take to town to trade. Some hours later, Cade had the cart fully prepped, the house ready for an extended absence, all their supplies loaded, and a reluctant Emin still affirming that,
No, I'm not going to change my mind, boy.
Emin waited inside, working once again on a reed basket, and an impatient Cade was pacing around Sasha and the cart, with one eye permanently on the highway road. The lower the sun got, the more worried he became. This feeling grew so strong that when he finally saw a tall, heavily wrapped man round the bend, Cade literally jumped and threw a tight fist into the air.
Yes! Emmon! Quickly, Granda!
Emmon slowly walked up the ramp, shaking his head. He pulled the trapdoor closed and turned to look at Cade, who was visibly shaking. Emmon let out a small sigh, but smiled.
Lad.
Cade snapped his head from the man walking down the road to face Emmon.
Yes. What is it? What's wrong?
Emmon returned to the boy the flattest expression he felt he had ever delivered, then looked up at the seat of the cart.
Are we going, or should I go finish my basket?
Cade nearly tripped in his haste, rushed to his granddad's side, and more lifted Emmon into the cart seat than helped him climb up himself. As the Anvat reached them, Cade was tugging at the bridle of a reluctant Sasha, trying to get her moving. A soft tap on the rump with Emmon's cane got her going.
Ah, hello, Mr. Fallon, sir.
Hello, lad, Fallon replied. Please excuse the delay, and also my bluntness. We need to be moving right away. Are you and your granda ready? Cade nodded, and they both followed Emmon in the cart, who hadn't stopped to greet the Anvat. Once moving, Fallon dropped his mask and seemed to visibly relax.
What's wrong?
Cade asked. Oh no, nothing's wrong. I was just held up in Nearton, so we need to be moving if we're to make Nearset before dark. Emmon from atop the cart called down.
News from Nearton, speaker.
None that's good. We got a runner from the Corps. Stopped into the sect yesterday. Still no sign of Dahl. And word is this runner was from Fess Araranth. Emmon humphed but said nothing more.
What does that mean?
Cade asked, looking from one man to the other. Well, Fallon answered, Fess Araranth is the furthest south fortress city, other than Garad Fess. If the scout corps at Fess Araranth hasn't found Rashin Dahl, it means that Dahl is further south than we thought. Emmon snorted.
Or it means the scouts don't know how to do their job, and they just missed him on their clear south.
It's possible, though they haven't lost one of the Vianuita, at least since I earned my raps, so I doubt it. A silence hung in the air after he said it. Cade spared a glance to the road and to the underbrush beyond it. It looked much like the road to Nearton. The highway didn't really deserve its title. It was little more than a dirt track, barely wide enough to accommodate two carts passing. It was the only road that connected the northern town of Nearset to the southern fortress city and the region beyond. Not that there was ever much reason to travel it, so the size of the road remained cramped, and the title held. Heading east, though, Cade had only ever gone as far as a causeway beyond the next bend and over a small rise. Looking into the woods in the slanted afternoon light and seeing the interplay of shadows therein caused a chill to scuttle up Cade's spine, a chill that reminded him of the twin rows of cuts that ran down his sides. Every shadow turned into a hungry veer in Cade's mind, and he found himself inching closer and closer to the Anvat as they walked. Have you ever killed a Vianuita? Cade asked, hoping to find additional confidence in their escort and set his mind at ease. One. I can't say it was a pleasant experience. Certainly not one I wish to repeat. What happened? Fallon looked at him for a moment before answering, perhaps deciding if it was a story he wished to recount. Me and my Rapt were crossing the Verin-Bavland border to deploy to an outpost that the sect lost contact with. It happens from time to time. Sometimes sickness spreads between the messenger birds. Sometimes a few go missing in a row and the outpost doesn't send more because they're waiting on a reply.
And sometimes,
Emmon interrupted,
an outpost gets tired of reporting to a sect that does nothing to help them, and they just stop sending birds and go missing.
Fallon paused for a moment, despite the implication that his order was more interested in control than it was in helping those that needed it, and despite the rudeness. Fallon seemed to agree. At least he didn't contradict the old man. Aye, sometimes it's that too. In any case, for us it was because they were dead. When we arrived, the outpost had been torn apart. Dre's my Rapt. She couldn't tell how long it had been, but we didn't want to wait around to find out if it was still there. As we left, Dre did a circuit of the grounds and found several of the post's Anvat. Seems the Veer had picked off the Anvat that were patrolling one at a time, until there was no one to protect the outpost. Fallon's face fell and took on a look of deep sadness. Did you know them? Cade asked. I had a friend there. It's why I volunteered to go check the outpost in the first place. Farland's voice strained, and a shuddering breath escaped his chest. He's gone. Much to Cade's shock, it was Emmon that spoke.
I'm sorry, Speaker.
Farland took a breath and continued. Thank you. I didn't know this at the time. Dre told me the news after. Seems the problem was that the outpost was understaffed of unwrapped, and we made the same mistake. While Dre was scaling out the grounds, the Veer came for me. I didn't see it coming and nearly died because of it.
Which one was it?
Cade asked. We don't know. If not for Dre's testimony, I don't think the sect would have believed me, but we had no record of it. Cade stopped, staring into the woods, and looked to Farland, not understanding. From atop the cart, he could see a similar expression on his grandeur. He didn't know? Cade thought. It made no sense. Veer Nuhita roughly translated into Veer that is named. It was a title reserved for Veer that were so well known, or so dangerous, that they had been tracked ever since their creation. This familiarity meant that they were all named. It was by definition that these were all known. For Farland to say that he had killed a Veer Nuhita, but not to know its name, was paradoxical. It was so bizarre that Cade passed over the causeway, marking the furthest he had ever been towards Nearset, without so much as a furtive glance. The creature was bigger than a simple Metvir. It was bigger than the Enchained. Cade's eyes widened slightly. The Enchained was one of only a few Veer that had been captured. It lived a stationary life in the square of a northern fortress city. Cade had never seen her, but stories of her were more descriptive than most, and her size was often noted as somewhere north of 2 horses atop one another. For this unnamed Veer to be bigger than her, but still not known, was amazing. Farland went on. We still don't really know how it happened. A creature like that should have been tracked constantly, and an outpost in the region that was as undermanned as this should never have been allowed to exist. Alas, it did. Anyway, I was looking through the rubble, and I heard Dre call out. She must have been 200 paces away, but she spotted it before I did. Good thing she did, too. Any later, and I don't think I'd be here. Nearly lost a few limbs while I held out for Dre to get there. She managed to distract it when she finally turned up, and I got a lucky shot in. Thankfully, a lucky shot when you're holding a Salmoral is often all you need, and in this case, it was. Cade walked on a few paces before speaking. It was comforting to be in the presence of an Anvat that had actually killed a Veer Nuhita, but the fact that Farland's survival hinged on a woman that wasn't currently with them left Cade feeling uneasy. Is Rashinval dangerous? Cade asked, while glancing again to the dense woods flanking the thin road.
All Veer are dangerous, lad. I think you'd have that one worked out by now,
Emmon said. He said it in a straightforward way, but it lacked the heat of the earlier reprimand. This was just a reminder.
Dahl is less threatening than most. The only reason he's Veer Nuhita at all is that he's been alive so long that he was given a name. He hasn't been tracked since his creation like some of the more dangerous Nuhita, and it's not known who he was before he was made.
There are theories, Farland interjected. The sex historists argue about it, but it's thought that Rashian Dahl was once a Sir Radoran en Balan. It's not really known why the name changed, but Balan was charged with devouring a young man while out on a hunting trip. They apparently weren't very good hunters, and when food ran low, Balan ate his friend to survive. At least that's how the story goes. Dahl's remade form makes sense looking at it in that light too, so maybe they have the right of it. Cade looked up at Farland with a quizzical expression. What is his form? Farland went on, speaking directly to Cade. Dahl is half again as tall as a man, and many think he looks like a wolf, though in Dahl's case, a wolf missing a lower jaw. A wolf? Cade asked.
Like a Vix, lad,
Emmon offered.
only bigger and more heavy.
That's right. Farland nodded to Emmon and continued. The man the historists think he was out hunting wolves. It's thought that this is why Dahl looks how he does. When the Arndesim remade Dahl, it's thought that they made him without a lower jaw, so that he will always struggle to eat, as his hunger was his crime. Well, the cause of it anyway. They also think that hunting wolves enticed him into being more depraved, but I could take or leave that part. Wolves don't eat their own. As Farland explained the details of Rashin Dahl's changes, Cade became more and more ill at the thought. The Undecim were vile, more vile than the Vir by a wide margin in Cade's estimation. More vile than the Vir by a wide margin in Cade's estimation, which was notable, considering vile was roughly what the name Vir meant in the first place. It's disgusting, right, Granda?
That it is. A person's soul is how it is for a reason. No man should go thinking with what the former Eri created. To think any man or woman could think they know better than those who made that person themselves defies all sense.
Emin finished his tirade by spitting over the side of the cart. Almost under his breath, Farland said, I'm sure they had their reasons. Most people do.
What?
Emin exclaimed.
You mean to defend Undecim, Speaker?
Cade was just as surprised as Emin was. Undecim were what mothers used to frighten their children. They were the metric by which a person was judged to be unredeemable. The world was stuck in a broken state, overrun by monsters worse than any animal. Monsters so vile that they could only come from the minds of men, and it was all laid at the feet of Undecim. Rapt and men like Farland. Vart was supposed to be the bulwark that protected people from the horrors the Undecim wrought on the world, and seek out Undecim themselves, bringing them to justice by any means. And here was a man defending them. It was unthinkable. Calm yourself, old man. I don't mean to defend them. I just believe that most people do what they do for a good reason. They probably thought they were doing the right thing when they started. It was wrong. We know that now, but perhaps they didn't. Cade's mind went back to the night before, stuck under a Vir and looking into those hateful eyes. No way, Cade replied quickly. They must have known what they were doing was wrong. How can you make monsters that hurt people and think it's the right thing to do? I suppose it doesn't matter now, Farland replied. They're gone. Emin leaned over the side of the cart and stared at the Anvat.
It matters that we remember them for the monsters they were, and not try to explain away crimes they committed as trivial mistakes born of ignorance.
The group fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the steady clops of Sasha's hooves. Cade was just about to speak again, when he caught sight of a cart in the middle of the road, and a familiar-looking family beside it. Alrighty, so the discussion section for this one, I imagine, is possibly not going to be as long as the other ones. As it starts in the house with Cade and Emin, where it begins, it probably needs some work. I feel like setting the scene a little bit more. Again, this was related to description and how I'm unsure about when and where to put descriptive segments into the chapter or the paragraph that I'm currently writing. And I figure even if it isn't massively descriptive, just having a section there in which you're talking about the shape of the area, I think it's probably still important because, like, obviously you're never going to describe something sufficiently such that the reader, let me rephrase, the reader's always going to imagine more than you're going to describe, but if you don't describe it at all, you're not giving the reader a percentage of the page in which to do their imagining of that detail. So, even if they're going to do all the work and imagining it, you're not giving them the time in which to do that. So I think that's possibly important, even if I don't go crazy with it. Next, I want to work on Cade and Emin, the dialogue about convincing Emin to go into the next town needs to be much more convincing, because at the moment it's, it has a similar problem to the previous chapter where, characters just sort of put up a token effort for or against something and then people just naturally go along with it, which is not, how people tend to be. I also don't like that he packs and then moves immediately out to a shed or a barn that you've never heard of before. It's not mentioned at all in the opening or anything, and the fact that there's a horse just comes out of nowhere, which, I suppose certain details aren't going to be mentioned until they're mentioned, but maybe there should be something prior to this that has a bit of a detail about that. There are some bits I like in this. There's, as I spoke about in the previous video, there's some bits where, quote unquote, the characters are talking shop. They're having a conversation which somewhat goes over Cade's head, and in this chapter, actually, that Cade is the one that says the thing that's going to go over the reader's head. There's a moment in which there's mention of like a Vir Nuhita, and Cade says which one, which is something that the audience or the reader doesn't yet know, that Vir Nuhita means named one. And so if someone says Vir Nuhita, characters in the world immediately know, oh, it's a Veer that I can be told the name of and know a lot about it. And instead of Cade, that should maybe be someone else that says it, although he would know that too. So I don't know, it doesn't really matter who says that. But yeah, there are some good details in here that Farlan expresses about sort of details about the Veer and his backstory, or not his. It's not a backstory. Like, it's just supposed to be a quick off the cuff story. I don't even know if that should be in here. I like that it gives. Maybe it would be good to turn it into something that allows some more information about the world to be conveyed, which it sort of already does. It expresses that there are outposts that are near Veer. They're staffed with Anvat and Anrapt. This one was understaffed. There is a Veer that was unnamed, which is strange, which is, I think, a cool detail to have in a world where all of the serious threats are known. To have one that was unknown, it sort of leaves people with a question, I guess. And so that might be something to explore. The story itself, I think, needs work. There's, again, some pretty cliche things in there where, he says things like, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's just some cliche things in there. But yeah, really happy with some of the little world building bits. I think they're really good. Obviously, the whole thing needs to be rewritten. Like, I can't stress that enough. Like, I'm not happy with the overall how it is written, but I am happy with the the content it is expressing. I also like that I got something in here about the sex historists. Don't know again if that name will change. It's like a historian. I just liked that it used it's spelt differently, so it like the start of the word sounds like hysteria, which I thought was a really fun touch. That you could just read it and look at it as a weird way to spell historian, but the fact that hysteria, you can see how historians spreading hysteria might. You could argue that historians do that or don't do that depending on where they are and what they're saying. But the fact that Rashindal has been tracked for a long time, and the idea that Sir Radorin and Balan is potentially his, the name Radorin, like Radorin became Rush-in, and Balan became Dal. I wanted it to be different enough that I wanted to try and walk a line between, like, oh yeah, I could see how that name was once this other name, but also at the same time have it be sufficiently different that maybe Dal and Balan aren't really that similar, but yeah, I thought it was cool that there's like some misinformation in the world about not knowing where this one came from, if he was this guy, but still acknowledging that the form that he has would fit given the crime that person was known to have committed. Sort of, he's wolf-like, he has trouble eating because he's missing a jaw. The person was hunting wolves and his crime was eating his friend. So, I think this is a good thing to have, because this is very much something that I want to have existing in the story. This idea of like most of the Veer are the way they are because of the crime they committed, and then they've been changed to reflect that. Because that's an important detail in why the Veer exist at all. So yeah, I want to have that. And it also leaves open a good opportunity for Cade to express disgust at Arndesim, which he is soon to find out that he is one. So I think that's really good that, again, that this just walking to the next town chapter has given a way for me to get some of this information across. At the same time, I do kind of worry that it's just like, perhaps I should find better, more interesting ways to do this, because just having people walking between one town and the next and talking to each other, it's not very interesting. And I feel like a lot of books probably make that mistake of it. This literally is just an exposition dump, and I'm sure there are ways to do that right, but maybe I'm not skilled enough to know those ways. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it reads okay, and there's enough interesting detail about the world that because it's information that the reader doesn't know, they're finding out new things. Maybe that's enough, but I suspect it's not. And finally, I like that it exposes Farlan as being the sort of person who
almost defends Arndessim. Like he doesn't it's not necessarily that he defends them. He just doesn't really hate them like everyone else does. He just sort of treats most people with this philosophy of, they probably had reasons at the time. Most people don't see themselves as the villain. So if you were put in their shoes, you might think you were doing the right thing, which I think in certain ways is a great philosophy. It's similar to my own, but at the same time, it definitely has flaws, which are flaws I see in myself. So, so I like that has a chance to be expressed here. And I also like that Cade, the movement of him along this path, and the fact that he didn't realize that he's walked over this causeway and is now the furthest from home he's ever been, which is, I just really like that it wasn't a big moment in the story. It was just like he didn't even realize that he is now as far away from home as he is, which I think is really cool. Like, I don't know, just it makes me think of, like, it gives me this impression of, like, a kid unknowingly being thrown into something that's about to be horrible. And like, I feel like, it's sort of almost a metaphor for the whole, it's almost a metaphor of what the story is going to be, that he is basically just, unbeknownst to him, has just crossed over this threshold, and he completely missed it. And I also like that also gives the reader a little bit of, like, progress. Like, at the start of the chapter, not the start of the chapter, but earlier on, it's talking about, that he hasn't really been this way very far. The causeway up ahead is the furthest he's been. And then later on in the chapter, you're like, oh, fuck, he just passed the causeway. So you get the sense that you're, like, moving on and you're getting closer, like, you're getting down the road. But, I mean, I don't know, I probably need to put much more in regards to detail about giving checkpoints on the way to show how they're, like, actually progressing, as I have heard that is... I've heard someone talking about the sort of plot and how it progresses, and that, like, you've got, I don't know what it is, set up, what's the last word? Like, resolution, I guess, like, how a story ends, how it's set up, and the progress in between, and saying that, you can have really, really good progress and a shit ending, or not shit, but an ending that deflates, and you can still have a fairly passable book. But if the progress is boring and the ending is amazing, people are going to put it down before they even get to the ending because the progress isn't there. And so, it's been expressed that that's a great thing to strive for, like, really good sort of noticeable progress and very clear, showing people that you're actually moving and new things are happening, which is something I really want to work on having. But yeah, that's all. This is now a 40-minute recording that I have to edit down to something. Oh, God. Wish me luck. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Just going to tack this on at the end here. Another name that is similar to Anfart that I decided was horrible and didn't want to have in the book. Draeh, Dre, was initially what I had decided to call Farland's other half, until I realized that just sounds like Dre, like Dr. Dre, when you say it out loud. And so again, that's a name that's unfortunately, like, in my head was much, Dre. It was this, and the spelling makes it look kind of cool, and, it's like a word that you're very unfamiliar looking to look at. But unfortunately, it's just lame. So, there you go. So, yeah, just thought I'd tack that on the end. Cheers.